47 phone calls, 47 visits from animal control officers who drove out to my property, looked around, shook their heads, and left with nothing to write up. Because there was nothing wrong. There was never anything wrong. My cattle were healthy. My fences were legal. My land had been in my family for 3 generations. But she kept calling, every single week, sometimes twice a week, like it was her part-time job. And for 2 years, I kept my head down, kept my mouth shut, and kept working my land the way my grandfather taught me. But then she made one mistake. She went after my water. And that was the day everything changed. My name is Dale Merritt. I own a 640-acre cattle ranch in rural Hendricks County. And this is the story of how one woman's obsession with ruining my life gave me the opportunity of a lifetime, and how I used every legal tool available to make sure she never bothered another rancher again. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the trouble, the real beginning, the one that matters. My grandfather, Earl Merritt, bought this land in 1959. He was a quiet man who believed in 2 things, hard work and minding your own business. He cleared the acreage himself, dug the first fence posts by hand, and built a cattle operation that fed our family for decades. When he passed, the land went to my father. When my father's health declined, it came to me. I was 34 years old, working a construction job in the city, and I made the decision to leave everything behind and come home to run the ranch full-time. That was 11 years ago. For the first 8 of those years, life was quiet. We had good neighbors, mostly other farming families, a few retirees who liked the open space and the silence. We waved at each other on the road. We helped each other out during storms. It was the kind of community where people understood what rural life looked like. Then, Maplewood Estates arrived. A developer purchased a 90-acre tract about a quarter-mile from my eastern fence line. Within 18 months, they had carved it into 74 residential lots, paved smooth streets with little cul-de-sacs, planted identical young trees every 30 feet, and filled the whole thing with people who had never lived near a farm in their lives. Now, I want to be fair. Most of those new residents were perfectly decent people. They had questions at first, about the smell, about the sounds, about why my roosters did not check the clock before crowing. But most of them adjusted. A few even came out and introduced themselves. One family started buying eggs from me directly. But then there was Sandra. Sandra Welch moved into Lot 12 on Maplewood Drive about 8 months after the subdivision opened. She was a retired office manager from the city, recently divorced, with a lot of time on her hands and a very strong opinion about what a neighborhood should look and smell like. The first time I saw her, she was standing at the edge of the road in pressed khaki pants, staring at my south pasture with an expression like she had stepped in something unpleasant. I waved. She did not wave back. 2 weeks later, I received my first visit from Animal Control. Officer Trent Hollis from the County Animal Control Office pulled up in his white truck on a Tuesday morning while I was mending a section of fence along the east side of the property. He was a big, good-natured man in his 40s who looked mildly embarrassed to be there. He told me he had received a complaint. The caller reported that my cattle appeared to be malnourished and distressed. He needed to do a welfare check. I put down my tools and walked him through the whole pasture. 32 Black Angus cattle in excellent condition, clean water troughs, fresh hay in the feeders, a certified veterinarian who visited quarterly and had never once written up a concern. Officer Hollis looked at my cattle, looked at his clipboard, and said, "Your animals are in perfect health, Mr. Merritt. I apologize for the inconvenience." I told him it was no trouble and offered him a cup of coffee, which he accepted. That should have been the end of it. 3 weeks later, he was back. Same complaint, different wording. Now the cattle were allegedly roaming unsecured near a public roadway. I walked him the entire perimeter. Every fence post was solid. Every gate was latched. Nothing was even close to the road. He apologized again. He looked even more uncomfortable than the first time. By the 6th visit, which came just 4 months after the first, Officer Hollis had stopped pretending he expected to find anything. He would pull up, we would walk the property together, he would fill out his paperwork noting no violations found, and we would shake hands at the gate. He started calling ahead to let me know he was coming. "Another one, Dale," he would say, same caller. He could not tell me her name officially, but in a small county, word travels. And I already knew. I started keeping a log, every date, every officer's name, every complaint description, every outcome. I kept that log in a green notebook in my kitchen drawer, and I added an entry every single time that truck came down my road. By the end of the first year, I had 29 entries. Now you might wonder why I did not do anything sooner, why I did not fight back or confront her or hire a lawyer. Honestly, because I was raised to believe that patience was a virtue. My grandfather used to say that a man who reacts to every provocation spends his whole life reacting. He said the best answer to foolishness was usually just to keep working. So I kept working. I reinforced fences that did not need reinforcing. I installed a $4,000 water filtration system for my troughs just so no one could ever question the quality of my animals' water. I had my veterinarians start filing written health certifications after every visit, not because I was required to, but because I wanted documentation, and still the calls kept coming. Call 31 was about noise. Apparently my cattle were disturbing the peace at night. Call 36 alleged that I was running an unlicensed commercial operation on my land. Call 41 claimed that I was illegally diverting a natural waterway to flood neighboring properties. That last one almost made me laugh. My property sits on a gentle slope that runs away from Maplewood Estates, not toward it. Water flows in the exact opposite direction of her house. Officer Hollis told me, quietly, in the way that good public servants sometimes communicate when the system is not working the way it should, that his supervisor was growing frustrated. Not with me, with the calls. Resources were being wasted. Other actual animal welfare cases were being delayed because officers kept driving out to my land to find healthy cattle standing in clean pastures. But as long as someone kept filing complaints, they were legally obligated to investigate, so she kept filing. And they kept coming, 47 times in 22 months. And then she went after my water. I have a natural spring on the northwestern corner of my property. It has been documented on county maps since 1941. My grandfather had it surveyed, registered the water rights, and built a small collection pond that feeds into my irrigation and water troughs through a gravity-fed pipe system. That spring is one of the most valuable things on my land. In a dry summer, it is the difference between a functioning ranch and a disaster. In month 22 of Sandra's campaign against me, I received a certified letter from the County Water Authority. Someone had filed a formal petition claiming that my spring was not a private resource, but rather a shared natural waterway that I was monopolizing for commercial gain, and that the county should force me to open access to it. The petition used very sophisticated legal language. It had clearly been written, or at least inspired, by someone who had done their research. I sat down at my kitchen table and read that letter 3 times. Then I opened my green notebook. I looked at 47 entries, and I made a decision. I was done being patient. I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who had handled agricultural law in our county for over 20 years. I drove into town that same afternoon and laid my green notebook on her desk. She read through every entry, every date, every complaint description, every outcome. When she finished, she looked up at me and said, "Dale, do you know what this is?" I said, "I had a pretty good guess." She said, "This is a documented harassment campaign, and it is documented better than most cases I have seen in 20 years. We filed a formal response to the water petition immediately, attaching certified copies of the original 1941 water rights documentation, the county survey records, 3 independent assessments confirming the spring was entirely within my property boundaries, and a legal brief explaining that the petition had no factual or legal basis whatsoever. The Water Authority dismissed the petition within 6 weeks. Completely, no conditions, no compromise, just dismissed. But Patricia and I were not done. We filed a formal complaint with the County Animal Control Office documenting the pattern of false reports, the resources wasted, and the impact on my operation. And then I asked Patricia about something else. Something I had been quietly researching for several weeks on my own. I asked her about the land surrounding Maplewood Estates. While all of this was going on, while I was dealing with animal control visits and water petitions and certified letters, I had been doing some quiet reading, county records, property tax filings, development permits, and I had found something very interesting. When the developer built Maplewood Estates, they had purchased a 90-acre tract from a landholding company called Sycamore Ridge, LLC, standard transaction, nothing unusual on the surface. But Sycamore Ridge LLC had originally been formed to manage a much larger parcel, 340 acres total. They sold 90 acres for the subdivision. The remaining 250 acres were still sitting on the books under the same LLC. Those 250 acres formed an L-shaped buffer, wrapping around the eastern and southern edges of Maplewood Estates all the way to the county road. Here is why that mattered. Every street inside Maplewood Estates connected to two main entrance roads. Both of those roads crossed a strip of land owned by Sycamore Ridge LLC. The developer had negotiated an access easement when they built the subdivision, a legal right to use that land for road access, but that easement was tied to Sycamore Ridge LLC as the landowner. If someone else purchased that 250-acre parcel, they would become the new landowner of all that buffer land, subject to the existing easement, yes, but also holding significant rights over how the surrounding land was used, what could be developed on it, and what happened right outside the edges of Sandra's neighborhood. I looked up Sycamore Ridge LLC in the state business registry. The managing member was a commercial real estate investor who had been dealing with serious financial difficulties related to a failed development project 2 counties over. He had been quietly trying to sell this parcel for 18 months. The land was an awkward shape for most buyers. His asking price had dropped 3 times. I called Patricia and asked her to make a discreet inquiry. He was very interested in selling. I spent 2 weeks running the numbers carefully. I reviewed my finances. The ranch had been profitable for 7 consecutive years. I had equity. I had savings I had been building deliberately for years. I made him an offer. He accepted within 48 hours. The closing happened on a Thursday morning. It took about 2 hours. Patricia sat beside me. When it was over, I was the legal owner of 250 acres of land that wrapped around the eastern and southern edges of Maplewood Estates. I drove home, changed into my work clothes, and went out to check on my cattle. I did not tell anyone. Not yet. I spent the next 3 weeks working with Patricia to understand exactly what my rights as the new landowner were. We reviewed the easement documents line by line. We consulted a land use attorney. We had a surveyor walk the entire parcel and produce a fresh certified boundary map. The access easement permitted residents to use the entrance roads. It was valid. I had no interest in challenging it, but the easement said nothing about the surrounding buffer land. The open fields that Maplewood residents had been informally using for years, for dog walking, for their kids to cut through on bikes. None of that was covered by any easement. It was simply my land. I also discovered that the original developer had filed plans for a Phase 2 expansion of Maplewood Estates onto a portion of this very parcel. They had never executed those plans, but if they ever decided to pursue it, they would need my cooperation. Patricia sent a formal notification letter to the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association, to the developer's legal department, and to the county planning office. The letter simply informed them of the change in ownership, provided my contact information, and noted that any activities occurring on the land outside the specific easement boundaries should cease immediately pending a formal review. Polite, professional, entirely within my rights. The HOA called Patricia's office within 2 days. The developer called within 3. I want to be clear about what I did and did not do with this land. I did not block the access roads. I did not interfere with any residents' legal right to enter or exit their homes. I did not take any action designed to cause hardship to the decent, ordinary people who lived in Maplewood Estates and had nothing to do with any of this. What I did was enforce my property rights, calmly and completely. The informal walking paths through my fields were closed. I installed proper fencing along the legal boundaries with clearly marked private property signs. Not aggressive, not provocative, just accurate. The plans for Phase 2 expansion? I met with the development team and made very clear that any future expansion onto my land would require extensive negotiation, would be subject to conditions protecting my ranching operation, and would not come cheap. They shelved the Phase 2 plans indefinitely. And the open buffer zone between the subdivision and the county road, the space residents had assumed was somehow public. I began the permitting process to expand my cattle operation onto that acreage. Nothing illegal, nothing improper. Just a landowner using his land. Sandra found out about the purchase the same way most of the neighborhood did, through the HOA notification letter. She showed up at my gate on a Saturday afternoon. I was working near the barn and I saw her car park on the road. I walked down to the gate and waited. She stood on the other side of the fence and told me that what I had done was wrong, that I was using money to bully ordinary people, and that she intended to fight this. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "Sandra, I have had animal control at my property 47 times in less than 2 years. Every single visit found 0 violations. I have every date, every officer's name, and every complaint description documented in a log that my attorney has reviewed. I purchased this land through a completely legal transaction using my own money. I am enforcing property rights that have always existed, and I intend to continue doing so. She told me I could not prove she made those calls. I said my attorney and I were not making any specific accusations. We were simply a rancher and his lawyer who had documented a pattern of 47 false complaints filed against a legally operating cattle ranch. And that documentation had already been provided to the county animal control office and was available for any future legal proceedings that might become relevant. She left without saying anything else. 3 months later, Sandra Welch listed her house on Lot 12 of Maplewood Drive and moved back to the city. I heard this from Officer Hollis, who stopped by one afternoon, not on a complaint, just to say hello, and to tell me that his office had received 0 calls about my property since the ownership documents for the adjacent land had become public record. 0 calls. After 47. My grandfather told me something once when I was about 12 years old and furious about some injustice that felt enormous at the time. He said, "Dale, the land does not care about arguments. The land cares about who shows up every morning and does the work." I thought about that a lot during those 22 months. I thought about it when animal control trucks pulled up my driveway for the 30th and 40th and 47th time. I thought about it when that water petition landed on my kitchen table. And I thought about it on the morning after the closing, when I walked the boundary of my new 250 acres in the early light, with my boots wet from the dew and my cattle visible through the fence on the other side of the pasture. I had not set out to buy that land as revenge. I had set out to protect what was mine, my operation, my water, my family's legacy. The opportunity appeared because I was paying attention, because I was doing the work every day, even when someone was doing everything she could to make that work impossible. The ranch is now 890 acres. We added 12 head of cattle last spring. The expansion onto the eastern bufferland is moving through the permitting process, and I expect to have the first cattle grazing that acreage before the end of the year. Maplewood Estates is still there. Most of those families are good people, and I have no quarrel with them. The entrance roads function exactly as they always have. Life goes on. And my green notebook, 47 entries, 2 years of patience, every date and every outcome, still sits in my kitchen drawer. I do not need it for anything anymore, but I keep it there to remind myself what happens when you do not quit.